Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second of our hopefully regular series of podcasts from irishborderpoll.com, where we're talking to the leading lights, the la grande fromages of the debate around Irish reunification. We had John Alderdice from the former leader of the Alliance Party, if you recall last time. Today we are delighted to be joined by Peadar Tóibín, the leader of Aontú in the Dáil, who has come fresh from the the um, the debate about installing Simon Harris as the new Taoiseach. So we're very delighted to have Peadar tonight to talk to us about his perspective on Irish reunification. His party is explicitly an Irish Republican Party. It's new. It's got a very interesting perspective on unity, and of course is very committed to life and economic justice as well. It's quite a snappy brand. I think we'll talk to Peadar about that in a minute. But Peadar, if I can just start with you and just get you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you, who you are, who are your people, where you're from, and how you got into this business in the first place.
Thanks very much for the opportunity to have us on, Kevin. I greatly appreciate it. I suppose I'm from Navan in County Meath. The Tóibíns are probably third or fourth generation Meath people. And I suppose, a father of four young children. The eldest is just starting to be a teenager with all the teenager aspects about him. And the youngest is 8 years old. And I got interested in politics very, very young. So I'd say the first political experience that I had was literally 8 years old watching the hunger strikes unfold on television. I didn't come from a Republican family at all, really. Even though my grandmother wasn't coming them on, there wasn't any Republicanism really in my family. But I was just, I suppose, shocked and captivated by the imagery of what was happening in the hunger strikes. I remember talking to my parents at the time to try to understand what it was about. And interestingly enough, at the time, my mother was full of probably the black propaganda that existed in the South. And she told me that if these men didn't go on hunger strike, and that the IRA would damage their families outside of the prisons, etc. And that was some of the rumors that were going around the south of Ireland at the time. But I remember at the age of about 10 or 11 years of old getting books from Tim Coogan on what was happening in the north of Ireland. I remember the Loughgall massacres was the first time that I signed a petition in sympathy of the volunteers that were killed at that occasion. And I became very interested in politics. I remember I brought Unfublcht home, probably around the age of 15, to my house, and my mother got it and she clattered me across the back of the head with the Unfublcht and told me not to bring it back into the house again. But anyways, I studied politics in college. I was briefly a member of Fianna Fáil, but I didn't believe that they had any great desire to see change in this area at all. And I joined Sinn Fein probably around 1998, was with them for about 25 years. I came to, I suppose, a strong difference of opinion with them about 6 years ago now, 5.5 years ago, in relation to the right to life. But I did also feel that, I suppose, on social issues, Sinn Fein were moving probably significantly to the left of where I was. And I did believe that there was a significant element of people who wanted to see Irish unity, but didn't hold that kind of, let's say, hard left view on social issues at the time. So I felt that there was no option. I didn't want to become an independent because I don't believe independents make any systemic change in the country. I wanted to see United Ireland, and I wanted to see, could we create a vehicle that would maybe work towards those issues of life, economic justice, and Irish unity as well. So here we are, 5 years after it was founded. We have probably 2,000 members now across the country, about 60 functioning common, 4 elected representatives. Interestingly, in the polls in the south, we hit about 5% in the last poll, which we're delighted with. It's higher than the Green Party, the Labour Party, and People Before Profit. They have about 154 elected reps between them. We have 4 elected reps. They have millions of euros of state funding between them. We've none. and they get a chunk of media attention from the traditional media. We get little, but I suppose we are building on the ground a grassroots movement across the country, and that's why we're seeing that growth at the moment. We have a local and European elections in the south, obviously happening in June, so that's a big test for us. See, can we crystallise that level of support that we've gained into actual seats on council and in the European Union? And I'm actually standing in Midlands Northwest now as a candidate for Aontú in that European election. So we are flat out in fifth, as the saying goes, or busy out. We have a small kind of volunteer team at the heart of the organisation, producing all of this development. And so, you know, it's tough times, but it's good times as well.
I can just take back just a minute to something you said just a moment ago about in my experience, people who leave political parties in whatever context, really, it's a combination of a kind of a cumulative series of issues where you don't feel at home anymore, or you don't feel you've gone in the same direction, and then there's a catalyst, and then there's a break. I mean, was it like that for you? Can you perhaps just talk us through a little bit about how you left Sinn Fein, or you might say how Sinn Fein left you, and how that then propelled you in the direction that you've gone in since?
Yeah, so I'm always cautious about speaking about my old party, because in many ways I don't want to slam the door necessarily too much on them. But listen, my analysis of Sinn Fein would be this: in that, especially during Gerry Adams's leadership, Sinn Fein were a kind of how would you say it? They were a coalition of different types of people who all sought Irish unity. So you had the hard left socialists. You also had, you know, the Middle Ireland traditional Republicans. You know, people in Carrickmore probably held far more in common with the people of North Leitrim that were voting for Fianna Fáil, other than the fact that they were on the wrong side of the border and that they had suffered oppression for 60 years longer than the people in North Leitrim. And so there was always those two wings within Sinn Fein, and they were fairly balanced for long periods of time. And, you know, whatever your critique of Gerry Adams was, he had probably a gravity that held those two wings pretty much together fairly solidly in that period of time. But that was definitely starting to change from about 2014, 2015 afterwards. I was of the view that, you know, a broad coalition was necessary to achieve Irish unity, and that meant to sometimes have a little bit of flexibility, freedom of conscience, for example, on issues that most European political parties had anyways as a right. But, you know, Sinn Fein is a very centralized, managed political party. It has a small number of people at the top who make the decisions, and decisions are rolled out from the top. And as a result, the infrastructure of democracy which exists, I don't believe could be properly used to try and create space. So, you know, I probably was always a little bit different than many of the Sinn Féin members on some issues. But obviously it came to a break in 2018. And then what I found after that was the party was moving further to the left on a range of social issues, and also holding people back, I thought, who had different views. Now, I'm sure there'll be people in that party who totally disagree with that analysis as well, but that would be my strongly held view over what was happening at the time.
I mean, how would you, just to probe you on the question then of how you relate to them? I mean, you know, you could look at the opinion polls and say that, you know, if you were at 4 or 5% after the next general election, and if, for example, Sinn Féin was in a commanding position and likely to lead the next government, but needed obviously partners to do so. I mean, would you be willing to partner with Sinn Féin? Would you expect to be asked? You know, do you see them? I suppose, do you see them as a kind of, I don't know, as sort of kissing cousins rather than political opponents? How would you characterize the relationship?
Well, I do think that Sinn Féin have changed significantly over the last number of years. And I think Sinn Féin is in difficulty, especially in the south. And for start, that's relative. The growth is still significantly higher than it was, you know, 4 or 5 years ago. There's no doubt about that. But what's happened in Sinn Féin is they are moving to the centre on a range of different issues now. to try to, I suppose, communicate that they're a safe pair of hands to Middle Ireland. They're transitioning into a catch-all political party in the south to be able to hold a wide enough support base to be able to achieve X, Y, and Z. And I think, you know, for example, there's a number of different, the politics in the south is very interesting. Currently, there's been a little bit of a backlash in the south since the referendums, especially on the kind of social issues, or at least the approach to the social issues. And one of the kind of, let's say, pivotal kind of touchstone issues now is the hate speech bill. So the hate speech bill is a bill that's 90% through the Oireachtas. It's through the Dáil and it's nearly through the Seanad. And the bill basically allows for a person to be put into jail for 5 years for hateful speech. Now, I abhor hateful speech. Obviously, I want people to engage with each other respectfully. But I'm also very mindful that, you know, one man's hateful speech is another person's truth in occasions. And this is, I think, maybe a difference between ourselves and Sinn Fein is we believe at the heart of a functioning democracy is the idea that there's a competition of ideas, okay? So if you want to see progress, you need to have the ability for ideas to compete with each other. And then after that competition, people can have a better opportunity to understand what are the better issues, that are the better solutions that will resolve the country's problems. But if you create a chilling effect over people's ability to engage in democratic discourse, well, then it leaves the country wide open to significant ideological swings that can create massive difficulties. And, you know, one of the reasons why I joined Sinn Féin in the first place was because of Section 31. I thought it was absolutely wrong that elected representatives from the people, both north and south, could be banned on media. And I actually thought, you know, it infantilizes populations as well to say you're too stupid to actually be able to listen to people because you might believe them if they're telling untruths. And it didn't work as well. That's like the key point. It didn't stem the growth of Sinn Féin during that period of time. And I was shocked to see Sinn Féin vote for the hate speech bill in the Dáil, vote for it in the Seanad, and then afterwards now flip and say that they oppose the hate speech bill. And Mary Lou is a very talented leader. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But she has been absolutely wrong-footed significantly over the last number of years on a range of different issues. The referendums that just happened was another example of, again, this. In the South, there's a political bubble in existence, and the kind of how the political bubble works is that NGOs, some of them do great work, etc., but many of them now are funded by the state. And when, let's say, the government raised these two referendums, they told the NGOs, they warned the NGOs that they would have to explain themselves if they opposed what was called progressive referendum amendments. So the NGOs, you know, my grandfather used to say, if you want to know what a person thinks, find out who's paying their wages, okay? So there's an element of that there. So the NGOs came out in favor then of the government's proposals. And I spoke to people in Sinn Féin and the Labour Party, and I said, well, why did you support those amendments? And they said, well, because we didn't want to come out against the NGOs. So you have that circular motion of the establishment talking to themselves, and Sinn Féin fell into that pothole in relation to that. I was speaking to many of their councillors and reps on the ground, and they were telling me all their Commons were voting no. So, you know, and that was another issue that Sinn Féin found themselves, that leadership found themselves significantly adrift from their membership. And that's done a couple of things. It's like at times people's support will fall because people don't agree with you. But sometimes support falls because people no longer find you credible. So even if you change your view on something, the credibility element is there. So, you know, we set up Aontú 5 years ago, knowing that in many ways we would stand against the prevailing political winds of our times, but of the view that actually it's better to actually stand for something in the first place anyways, than just simply go with the bloody wind, politically speaking. And that, you know, there's the old saying that, you know, and I don't know who said it, but it was, there go my people. I must go now and find out which direction they're going so I can lead them. And, you know, that's become the political element of a lot of political parties in the South. And I think we need to go back to the kind of conviction politics where people stood for something and then the electorate made up their minds on whether they wanted that or not.
Do you, I mean, that's an interesting point. Do you sense, I mean, there's very much a kind of prevailing narrative, I suppose, about the South in the last decade or so. I mean, it's you know, Ireland's a paradox in lots and lots of ways, but I mean, it's a young country and an old country. It's a very old ancient civilization, but a very young country in terms of its demography. And that actually an awful lot has changed in the last 10 years. Do you sense, and perhaps the referendum result recently was testament to this, that actually that kind of older, you know, I hesitate to small c conservative Ireland, that has kind of been brushed aside perhaps for the last few years with the referendums on abortion and same-sex marriage, with the big results there, that it seems to have been cast to one side as though this is a kind of permanent direction of travel. Do you sense that it actually it's still there and it's bounced back a little bit, and your success perhaps in the last few months in the opinion polls is a kind of result of that?
I would put it more in this context. So I think that, for example, in the United States, the Democratic Party used to be that coalition between, let's say, the coastal, elite and the working class unions of the central belts. But what's happened there is, I think that a lot of left-wing parties, especially, have got distracted by the culture wars and have forgotten about the bread and butter issues that are affecting society. So because of that, in the United States, that kind of, you had that sundering of the steelworkers of Pittsburgh, etc., from the normal democratic vote that they would go for. In Britain, you saw that in relation to the red wall falling to the Tories. In France, there's a million people who used to vote for the Communist Party now voting for the Front National. And so I think what's happened over the last while is that the pendulum has swung so much on the culture wars that actually people are kind of going to themselves, I can't afford to fully heat my house anymore. I can't afford to eat well and raise my kids properly. I can't afford to bloody turn on the electricity properly anymore. I'm finding it very difficult to pay the rents and pay the mortgages. And I'm listening to the political class, and the political class are talking about stuff that actually is now irrelevant to my life in many ways. And maybe it's worthy. And and a lot of people are probably not casting a decision on whether it's worthy or not, but they're becoming increasingly frustrated that it's not about what people are up against, the challenges that people have. And I think that's where the political establishment in the South has fallen foul, and that the tolerance of people has fallen. I also think that when I was young, censorship was a tool of the right. For example, so Pinochet's government in Chile was the government who tried to shut up people, and if they spoke, disappeared them, etc. Left-wing parties fought against any form of censorship and fought for freedom of speech. But I suppose in some ways, left-wing politics has become the ascendancy in many countries at the moment. And to buttress their ascendancy, the instinct has been to close speech down to a certain extent. And I think that most people have an understanding that it's important to have a liberal democracy. And what actually a liberal democracy means is that there isn't too much state encroaching on democratic rights, such as freedom of speech, etc. And I think that's what's happening. Now, there's a danger in all of that as well that's been turbo boosted, I think, by issues such as migration and other issues. That what we will see is maybe a complete radical swing in the opposite direction. But I do think that what we're trying to bring to the table here is actually a balance in all of these. And we have two instincts when we work with all of this: is one, compassion, but two, common sense. And on pretty much everything. So like the issue of migration is a hot topic here in the south of Ireland at the moment. Sure. And we would see that the government hasn't been using common sense. They haven't been strict enough to differentiate between those who need help and those who don't. They haven't, we've got information to show that 85% of people who have received deportation orders were never deported, etc. But we've always said that we still want to be able to help those people who are fleeing actual war and actual violence, as long as it's sustainable as well. We do have that kind of desire to help people in need as well. So, and because of the way political discourse is, it's very easy for parties to get pulled in significant directions now. But I do think we have a strong anchor in the objective of compassion and common sense.
Some philosophical differences there with and it's a very familiar debate, I suppose, in British politics as well. And you touched on, the kind of red wall issues that, for example, the British Labour Party contends with, where again it's got to kind of maintain a liberal wing and also kind of working class, small c conservative wing as well, and to synthesize those two positions. Just listening to you there, but it doesn't strike me that you would shut the door on potentially working with Sinn Fein. Is that fair enough?
Well, what we've said as a party, the only political parties that we won't work with at the moment are Fine Gael, and we would have difficulty working with the Green Party currently in the South. Not that we are an environmentalist political party, but the Green Party are so ideological currently, and there's such a lack of practical common sense in terms of incomes and taxes on people's on energy, etc. At the moment, we would talk to Sinn Fein for sure, but we would have to understand that it would be very important that our political objectives would be achieved. But I'll tell you, it's interesting. I was in a debate not recently, but about a year and a half ago, with David Cullinane, and David Cullinane was asked at the time, would he go into government with Aontú, and he said no, and he said he would go into government with Fine Gael though. And I just thought it was interesting that, again, going back to the idea of the changes in Sinn Fein, that Aontú is probably the only other party that has this explicit objective of achieving a united Ireland, and yet he would rule us out, and yet he would go into government with Fine Gael, who pretty much don't want a united Ireland as well. So, and that's part of what's happening as well with Sinn Fein.
Lovely. Thanks for that. I'm going to pass you across to my great colleague Kevin Rooney. He's got some questions for you as well on perhaps some of the cultural aspects. Kevin.
Sure.
That was absolutely brilliant there, Peadar, and you've already straight in on a lot of questions I was going to ask you. I'm going to have a different style from Kevin Maher, right? I'm going to go bullet point, bang, 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 to get through a lot of things. So help me out, Peadar, and be really quick in your responses. It might be that you then elaborate a wee bit further down the line. But I want to just clarify something. When you said the left-wing parties were getting distracted and getting into a culture war, I think Kevin Maher was thinking about the Labour Party in Britain at the time when he was speaking. But are you saying that Sinn Fein in the South, that Sinn Fein are going into that culture war now?
I do. I think they've slipped into those difficulties. And if you look at working class areas, for example, Ballyfermot, 90% no vote in those boxes. Most of working class Dublin, 80-90% no votes in the last referendum, and yet Sinn Fein would see them as a part of it.
Dead on, right? That's clear as a bell. Next question. I just want to clarify again. Kevin described you as a Republican Party. I've heard characters in the Irish Times and elsewhere calling you like Christian Democrat and right wing and centre right. Are you happy with the description? You're a Republican Party, but you're probably centre ground. Would that be fair?
We would see we would call ourselves an Irish Republican political party. We would see ourselves on economic terms left of centre. We would see ourselves on social issues common sense. We would see ourselves as a pluralist political party. So we would follow the ideas of Wolfe Tone. We believe that the only way to construct a republic is that everybody can be who they are to the full extent without fear or favour.
Okay. And I want to clarify one other thing, because I think it's a massive shock and I didn't know this. Are you seriously telling me that Sinn Fein have said they would not go into a coalition with Aontú, but they would with Fine Gael and everybody else? Was that a one-off maverick remark from David Cullinane, or do you think that's Sinn Fein's position?
Yeah, no, I think it was. I think at the time it probably was a once-off comment from David Cullinane in the middle of a radio debate. I haven't heard an opinion from them since, and I don't. I think the way things are, I'd say that they would talk to people who will talk to them.
Okay, it's just I have quite a lot of friends, especially in the north, but also in the south, actually, who basically think about whether or not they're going to give their one or two to Sinn Fein or Aontú. So I think there's quite a bit of crossover still. Some people might not like to hear that, but I think it's absolutely the case. So I would be shocked if I thought that was a general Sinn Féin position. Right, here's my bullet point questions. Right, okay, so you're talking about Sinn Féin. Lots of people on Twitter, lots of people elsewhere mischaracterize and abuse Aontú and all the rest of it. So here we go. First question, gay marriage, same-sex marriage, sorry, right? So tolerance. Do you accept the right of a man and a man or a woman and a woman to get married and for the state to recognise that, like the marriage between a man and a woman?
Yeah, so Aontú's position is that we offer freedom of conscience to all our members in relation to same-sex marriage. We would have members who support the traditional marriage, and we would have many gay and lesbian members who support same-sex marriage as well. Anybody, no matter what their orientation is fully welcome as a member of Aontú. And we appreciate the efforts of all our members.
Brilliant, brilliant. Abortion, the question of the right to life. So you have the legislation that's been passed in the Free State. So I want to ask you a question. What's done is done. Is it the case that Aontú actively tries to reverse that legislation, or is it more that you think about freedom of conscience of people who work in hospitals, doctors and nurses, who don't want to have to play a part in performing abortions? What exactly is your position on that whole question of abortion right to life now?
Yeah, so there's about, abortion's probably quadrupled in the States since it was legalized. It's now 10,000 a year. Our first objective, 85% of abortions that happen in the South are currently for socio-economic reasons. So we want, first of all, to create a situation where mothers feel economically confident enough to be able to raise their children to the best way they can. So right now, there's dozens of mothers who are giving birth homeless currently in the state. So that's our first objective in relation to that. Secondly, we would like to see, for example, there's a significant increase in the number of abortions in the state for children with Down syndrome and other disabilities. We would like to make it illegal to have an abortion on the basis of a child having a disability. We would also like to see a situation where the 12-week period for having abortion is brought down to 10 weeks. We understand we're not going back to a pre-2018 situation anytime soon, but we do actually want to see a society that is more geared to creating positive options for mothers so they can actually have a choice. And the point I would say here is that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael say they're pro-choice, but their economic policies make so many women feel that they have no choice. And we want to be able to make sure that there are economic choices there.
That's very clear. Catholic schools, I've got 3 questions about them, and I love your brevity, so keep that going. The first one is to do with in the south of Ireland, there's a bit of a campaign for the Catholic Church to give up a lot of the primary schools. I think they call it divestment of themselves of the school. In a nutshell, do you think that's fair enough? Bear in mind the level of faith to the Catholic Church has declined. Do you see a problem with that? Do you think that's a fair point?
Yeah, so first of all, we do, again, in education, believe in a pluralist system. We think that if you're Catholic, Protestant, or atheist, you should be able to, within reason, be able to select a school that offers education in your ethos, first and foremost. We do think that there needs to be some divestment of Catholic schools in the South. But I will say this, and this is the funny thing, even amongst agnostics, non-churchgoers, and atheists, when schools are brought towards a divestment situation, many actually oppose that, given that they still maybe hark towards the heritage, at least, of the school. In the same way, a lot of nationalists in the North like Catholic schools as such, because it's part of their cultural heritage too.
Okay, great. Well, that leads me to the second question, because it was about integrated education in the North with Stormont. If there's one question I can't get a clear answer to from lots of political animals, it's this question. The legislation that was passed in Stormont about integrated education, am I right or wrong on what your understanding? Does it privilege integrated education over religious schools now? Is that your understanding?
Yeah.
As briefly as you can.
So we support the option of integrated education for parents, but my understanding of the legislation as it currently exists, it gives a financial advantage to integrated education. So basically, it gives let's say a positive bias towards the development of integrated education schools. And I just think that all education options should be down to the choice of parents. So what happens down in the South when a new school is to be created, they literally poll the parents within the let's say the area in which that school will have its hinterland, and then the choices are on the basis of what parents want.
Brilliant. Brilliant. And then the last question about Catholic schools. I was reading the Irish Times the other day, and I seen there was a fellow from the Irish National Teachers Organisation, and he was making the point that he thinks that the teaching of religion should happen outside school hours, that Catholic faith formation should be taken out of the school day. There's so much in the curriculum, there's no time for it. Do you think, well, he's got a point, do you think that's outrageous? Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, so again, it goes back to the pluralism. So like it's funny because everybody gives out about 1950s Ireland. They say that there was one uniform manner of being, that everybody was forced to fit into a certain box. And then we managed in the 90s and the noughties to create this pluralistic situation where people were able to choose the education systems that they wanted. But now we're actually going back to the uniformity of the past. We're actually saying, no, you cannot choose. We're going to kick, religious education out completely. Now you'll have one uniform education system like the 1950s, but of course with a different ethos. So our attitude is that, and I think pluralism is really important, especially in terms of a united Ireland, because we hope to be able to bring 1 million unionists into a united Ireland. But to do that, we need to be able to tell people they can be who they are without fear or favor from the state. And if we're going to get into a situation where we allow one section of society dictates to everybody else about what's taught in terms of ethos in the school, I think that's a major mistake. And I think that's, for example, that's illiberalism cloaked as a liberal view in Irish society.
Brilliant answer, really interesting, and I really appreciate the way you're tackling the questions. So the next one, trans. I even hesitate to ask a question about trans because it's like stepping into a minefield, right? Now, the way I see it, and I could be wrong, and I could be getting people attacking me for this, but there seems like a very tiny percent, the teensy-weensy 1 or 2% of hardline extremists on this issue on both sides almost, right? And it feels like 98% of the population almost have an idea of live and let live. So just a simple basic question. If a young guy, say the young person's born in the male body with male genitalia, but they consider themselves to be of a different sex, do you support their right to basically be defined as something different from their original biology? Sorry if my language is crude, but I want to just keep it simple and brief. But
yeah, so we understand that there is gender dysphoria, and we understand that it's real and it's very, very difficult. And we believe that people who have gender dysphoria should be supported by the best modern science and evidence. But we will say that, and also that I personally don't really mind how people present themselves in relation to this. But I will say that it is important that women's rights are protected. So I do believe that a woman is a female adult. I do believe that women should have safe spaces. We brought about a bill, for example, that would prevent male-born sex offenders being put into women's prisons. Women should be able to play female-only sports, etc. And, one of the things is that in the south of Ireland, we have this National Gender Clinic, and one of the foremost scientists involved in that, who's most invested in this, who has helped people transition, believes that the Southern government is being brainwashed by NGOs on this, and that we need to get back to an evidence-based, scientific basis of understanding on this.
That's dead on. That was clear. Apologies to any listeners when our podcast comes out who says, Kevin, you're unsophisticated in asking that question. But I see myself as just a lay person, an ordinary punter, just asking simple, honest questions. So apologies to anybody if you think I'm lacking a bit of sophistication. Okay, immigration. You touched on it, but just to be clear, Aontú's position on immigration, am I right in thinking Aontú are saying we don't have a problem with immigration, we just think there should be tighter controls on it, and we have to accept that immigrants shouldn't be maybe in inverted commas, some people would use the word dumped on a small town if you've got 200 or 300 men in a little rural place or whatever. How would you sum up your attitude to immigration? But I'm really hard on you because I want you to sum it up in about 90 seconds.
But first of all, the color of a person's skin is of no more significance than the color of their eyes, okay? So we have no time for ethno-nationalism in relation to this at all. Secondly, I would say that we do have a very difficult situation emerging at the moment, in that the southern state is finding it very difficult to accommodate the numbers of people coming into the country. There's about 1,000 people currently in tents living in the city at the moment, 5,000 in direct provision who can't get out of direct provision because there's no homes, and there's 14,000 people currently who are homeless in the state at the moment. So what we're saying is that the government needs to have a system that really efficiently differentiates between those who need help and those who don't need help. That's not the case currently. People are spending years in this system, and even after the process is finished, the government is still not, there's no difference in the outcomes for people who have failed in their application or who are successful in their application. So we do understand that there are people from other countries making really positive contributions here in Ireland, but we do need to make sure that the system is stricter than it is at the moment.
Brilliant, Peadar. And also, I'm going to skip the next question because it came up in past and it was about, would you support Sinn Fein, the coalition government? I thought you were very clear on that. I think probably, Kevin, you're going to come in a minute and start the unity questions. The last thing I want to ask Peadar before we go in 60 seconds back to Kevin Maher, are you, after the two referendums, you're allowed to be selfish and you're allowed to disclose your innermost feeling. Are you feeling a little bit excited and happy in Aontú that basically you were out on a limb on that one and you read the mood of the people very clearly and it's given you a wee bit of a boost in the poll? Give a penny for your innermost thoughts. Share your wee secret thoughts with us on that one, Peadar.
Well, it's funny that the world of politics bloody moves on so fast that you hardly get a chance to actually, sit in a space of, reflection on things for too long. When we made the decision on our analysis of what was available to us. So we disagreed with the idea of deleting the word mother from the Constitution. We felt that this amendment would reduce carers' rights to support. Now, we braced ourselves at the time because we thought we would get a typical backlash from the political establishments, that they would try to pigeonhole us, as they often do, on a range of different issues. But we said there's no point in actually setting up a new party like this unless we're going to stand up for what we believe in. So we were delighted, absolutely, that vote happened. And interestingly enough, and this is, I think, it's probably too early to ascertain this, but it looks like the referendums are a watershed moment in Irish politics, because if you look at Sinn Fein, if you look at the Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, there's a lot of U-turning happening. There's a lot of recalibration of messages. There's a lot of reorientation of policy currently happening. So it may be the case that this referendum has been a watershed in terms of the direction of this country is going in politically. And obviously, we would see that as a positive thing.
That's fascinating. That was a brilliant. That was like a newsworthy little last sentence there. Fascinating, a watershed moment in Irish politics. Great, Kevin Maher, are you still there? We're about to get on to what is probably, without doubt, the most important part of our podcast, which is about Irish youth. Everything you were saying there, Peadar, to Kevin earlier, and me was brilliant, fascinating. But we exist because of the United Ireland question. So Kevin Maher, kick it away with Peadar. What do you want to kick off with? I'm conscious of time and that Peadar might have to get back into the Dáil to do a vote. So on you go, Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm struck by a remark that Mary Lou McDonald made fairly recently about characterising where we are with the Irish unity debate. And she referred to it, we're within touching distance. And some people kind of took that to mean that there's a referendum imminently. And of course, I don't think that's what she meant at all. But how would you characterise where we are in terms of the unity debate right now? And also, I'd be very interested just to hear what your thoughts are in terms of the pathway from where we are to getting that border poll. How do you read it?
Yeah, so I suppose where we are at the moment, I've no doubt that in the 6 counties, there has been a number of different ingredients into an increased interest in Irish unity. So the first one, obviously, is the demographic changes that have happened over the last 10 or 15 years. The second one definitely is Brexit. So Brexit, I think, has asked a section of, small unionists of themselves, really is the union in their interest. And I think that, a significant section of unionism now is voting for parties like the Alliance, and they're not as rigidly in adherence with the union as their previous political parties were. So there's definitely a change in the demographics in the north of Ireland. In the south of Ireland, there's also a very positive disposition towards Irish unity at the moment. It comes and goes. It's kind of like the tide. It comes in and comes out a little bit. Currently, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are opposed to Irish unity, in my view. The reason, practically, why they're opposed to it is because they're not operating in the north of Ireland. If they're not operating in the north of Ireland, unity is an existential threat to their existence as parties of government. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why to achieve Irish unity, we're going to need to see those political parties operating in the north of Ireland. Because even the opportunity of allowing for Northern nationalists to vote for the president of Ireland is a threat to Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, because it would radically reduce the number of votes that they would achieve for their candidates and radically increase the number of votes that Sinn Fein would achieve for their candidates. So it's never really discussed, but I think it's really important. The other element that I would say around achieving unity is I believe that Aontú is a very practical Irish Republican political party, and that probably differentiates ourselves from Sinn Fein in relation to that. So I look at the wall, at the border, as a wall with 1,000 blocks. Okay, so each of those blocks stands for an element of society. So whether it's, cancer services, north and south, or an All Ireland air ambulance service, or a All Ireland Irish language curriculum, or whether it's a spatial development, or etc. I think that if we start to work on each one of those blocks and just take the understanding that from now on we plan together, fund together, and deliver together. Okay, I don't think that's obviously is a massive threat to anybody to do that, because first of all, planning together, funding together, delivering together will be more efficient. It will provide better services, and it will be cheaper on both states to do that. And each time we manage to achieve a synergy in those terms across a range of 1,000 different issues, we take down one of those blocks. The border is not as high, and the day of transition is easier and less frightening to people, because unfortunately there will be people who are freaked out about change in any ways. And the recent reports by John Fitzgerald down south about potential costs of unity is a document of fear on that change. So in other words, it is to scare the bejakers out of people to say, well, listen, if you're going down this road, it's going to cost you big bucks. So if Aontú is in government on either side of the border, or if we have councillors in local authorities straddling the border, our objective will be to identify what levers we have that pertain to each one of those blocks, that we can start to erase those blocks in a practical fashion now to help people in their daily lives, even before unity comes down the tracks. So that is one of our major strategies in terms of trying to achieve Irish unity. I did a study there in 2016 on behalf of the Oireachtas Committee of Enterprise. It was the first time a study had been done in the history of the Oireachtas in the South since partition. And I interviewed 100 people across the north of Ireland, from trade unionists to business people to people working in civic society to people working in the civil service. And that, one thing that they all agreed with was plan, fund, and deliver together. And we really have to start to build that into normal development within society. What do you think? Sorry,
what do you think then in terms of a realistic timeline? Because there's lots of talk that we're in the kind of decade of opportunity, and that might be, this might be the actual moment. But I mean, I'm kind of pragmatic in terms of when people ask me about timelines. I think there's I obviously think this is a process that is inevitable, but it's very difficult sometimes because there's so many variables. What's going on in the north? What's going on in the south? What's going on in Britain as well? And these dials continually move, and they change, and the timeline, I think, changes as well. What do you think is a realistic timeline? Are we on for a border poll in the next 5 to 10 years? Do you think?
It has to be 10 years, in my view, because if you push it out any further than 10 years, it's not real in truth, because you're talking about two governmental timeframes there. And so what you're saying is that's fully adequate time to be able to plan, fully adequate time to be able to deliver on some of those maybe north-south synergies that I discussed on, and enough time to be able to build confidence in both societies, north and south, that this is achievable. We're probably a little bit different. That Sinn Fein are calling for a kind of citizens' assembly. I don't think a citizens' assembly is the way to go about this, to be honest. It's too shallow of a forum to be able to fully understand everything. And secondly, none of those people in a civic forum actually have a mandate in relation to this. I would do the kind of the New Ireland forum on this, where you would invite the southern state, at least, and hopefully in partnership with the Northern Assembly, would would basically invite all of the stakeholders of society into a forum that would meet on a regular basis, that would start to discuss all the nuts and bolts of what's involved. And then if they come to agreements, it'll be far deeper than just a civic forum. And it would have the mandate of all of those civic society organizations that they have been part of that particular process as well.
That seems quite a sort of substantial point of difference then between you and Sinn Fein, and if you know, theoretically, I mean, if you were in negotiations about forming a coalition with them, I mean, what would your advice be in terms of, would it be that would be a red line for you, that actually the Citizens' Assembly model is not necessarily the best one to lock this in, that actually it needs to be deeper and perhaps a bit more fulsome?
Yeah, listen, I'm not sure if it would be a red line. I would be cautious about throwing red lines around willy-nilly because they can often come back and haunt you to a certain extent. Yeah. But I just don't think it's fully thought out practical. I just think it's far too shallow of a system to grapple with all of those challenges. And they come and go. They're like snow off a ditch. You know, they appear, they last for a few months, and then they disappear. But all those civic society groups, you know, most of them are going to last for decades. The last part of that puzzle, I would say, is that there has to be reform of Stormont. So Stormont there's two major problems in Stormont at the moment. First of all, it's instability. I do think you have to create a situation where no political party can crash it in the future, because that crashing mechanism is always going to be utilized as a blocking tool in relation to major change, for a start. And the second element is there needs to be further devolution from London in terms of powers. So, you know, right now, the 6 counties has the power to exercise corporation tax, but doesn't use it currently. We do need to get to a situation where more of those competencies are located within 6 counties. And therefore, what we're doing is we're bringing back self-determination incrementally as well in terms of this. And that self-determination is a key reason why I support, obviously, Irish unity in the first place, because I always believe that people will make better decisions for themselves than anybody else will make for them. And I think Irish history is proof that people will always make better decisions for themselves than somebody else making them for them as well.
Well, just on Stormont, looking towards, you know, the unification of Ireland, should Stormont in some form be retained? Should it go? How do you see that working?
Yeah, I think that the southern state is far too centralized anyways. Okay, so I do think that we need to create what I would call regional assemblies that would actually have budgets in their own right. The southern state is and even the north is kind of, they're becoming city states to a certain extent, where that if you're a young person who's gone to university and you want to get a decent job, you pretty much kind of have to go to Belfast or Dublin. Usually you can't afford to live anywhere near those places, so you have to live in a commuter hell to be able to pay your mortgage for 40 years. And that's the bloody spatial development plan that we seem to have on the island of Ireland. I think if you had regional assemblies that had proper budgeting, you'd be able to see, you know, other cities develop that would be able to create the necessary balance between Belfast and Dublin. And actually a 9-county Ulster Assembly would be an ideal part of that mechanism.
Oh, fascinating. Okay. Kevin, I'll hand back to you. Have you got any more questions for Peadar?
Kevin, I do. Peadar, you're playing a blinder. Thanks for being so bang with your answers and so thorough. Here, I'm going to skip a couple of my questions on unity because I'm conscious of the time, but I just want to say 2 final teensy-weensy things about unity and then ask you for your predictions about how you're going to do in the election. So I read a wee bit from you on Grip, the website, where you started off, you were talking about you know, that poll from Fitzgerald last week, and you more or less said that the men and women who walked in the GPO in 1916 start calculating about what the price would be of United Ireland. In other words, it was patriotism that drove them to fight for United Ireland. My question links to that because Leo Varadkar came out last night, you probably heard in his final interview, where he said, well, what's 3 or 4% of GDP? If you really believe in the unification of your country, so what about an extra bit of money? Do you think people in the south of Ireland, by and large, would be prepared to pay more money for United Ireland. Now, I think there's a problem with that question I'm asking you, because it assumes the Fitzgerald, it assumes the sort of the basis of legitimacy to the report from last week. And we know that uni is a very fluid, dynamic, moving situation. So there's a crudeness to my question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you think there's a sufficient desire for you, or patriotism or love of our country, that a very big chunk of people in the south of Ireland would be prepared to pay with their pocket or not?
Yeah, first of all, you mentioned the patriotism of the volunteers in 1916. I honestly think that patriotism is born of bread and butter as well, because that was the generation that came after the famine. Okay, so they saw the devastation that was wrought upon Irish society due to a London government that didn't give a damn about Ireland. So they understood very well that self-determination is a bread and butter issue. And I would really say that they're not, patriotism, self-determination, and bread and butter are not inseparable. They're all part of the same elements. And I would say that one of the key reasons, I don't like to say this, but obviously the economy in the north of Ireland is one of dependency on London at the moment, unfortunately. Now, I think it's absolutely incredible that people, especially within unionism, the summation of their ambition is to leave their society dependent upon a London government economically. That is incredible, that any person who is proud of who they are, if they're a strong Ulster man or woman, that they will be proud to literally go with cap in hands to the landlord over in London and say, listen, will you throw us a few extra coppers here? We want to be able to buy some more hospital beds. I think that's no way for any society to run itself. Secondly, I have no doubt that the north of Ireland has all of the key ingredients. And I've said this before. I've said the idea that a person in Uri is just as clever as a person in Dundalk. A person in Dungannon is just as hardworking as a person in Monaghan. And a person in Derry is just as enterprising as a person in Letterkenny. For sure, there are structural differences in the six-county economy than there is in the south at the moment. But unity, first of all, would bring the north into the euro, which itself would be a significant turbo boost economically. The north would have a lower cost base for a period of time, which would make it more attractive for foreign direct investments. And I have no doubt that working with the southern economy, you would see that productivity level increase in the north of Ireland, which would increase income levels as well. Is there going to be a transition period where there'll be a cost to it? I think there probably will be to a certain extent, but I don't think it's anything like Fitzgerald's. I also think the British have a responsibility in terms of, they talk about the whole pensions issue. So a pension is a social contract. I pay my pension today on a contract with the state. The state will pay for my pension when I retire out of current income then. Most of the poor people of the north of Ireland who are owed a pension by the northern state will be still owed a pension, whether that's from the northern state or from the British state anyways, whether there's unity or not. And in any negotiation with the southern government, it would be absolutely, essential that the southern government ensure that the British government are responsible for their liabilities to the people, economic liabilities to the people of North of Ireland. I'm an optimist when it comes to Southerners, okay? We have a Southern media, which I don't think is fully reflective of people. I think if you scratch the surface of most Southern Irish people, there is a strong desire for justice in terms of Irish unity. And we spoke about self-determination and we spoke about economic reasons. But one of the major objectives for Irish unity is because it is justice. And I think that people in the South see that this is an injustice in the partition of Ireland, and they want to see that healed and that we reach a state of justice into the future as well.
That's a really fantastically interesting answer there about the justice thing. It's almost as if people don't want to talk about that at the moment. It's all about the economy, but that injustice of partition, you almost come across as old-fashioned if you use that argument. So it's fascinating that you say that, because I've felt that as much as you need to make new arguments for today and the future, I thought that was fascinating. Peter, we're right towards the very final fence. All we're going to do is you're going to put your neck on the block and you're going to give us predictions about the election now, about Aontú. Now, before you go for your predictions, I have a really nosy question, which is, why are you standing in the European election? In other words, if you got elected, would it not be a disaster? Because you're the main man and you're punching way above the weight of one person in the Dáil. So, I mean, is that a naive question on my part, Peadar, or what?
Well, it is. I suppose it's a good question. It's a question of strategy first and foremost. It will be answered in either direction in the future. But I suppose where I come from on this is my attitude has always been that the day that my seat becomes more important than my political project is the day I shouldn't have a seat at all. Okay, I've always taken risks for something that I really believed in. I could have stayed with the old party. It would have made my financial future far more, secure, etc. But my attitude is there's no point in me being here unless I can't crowbar these political objectives into the mainstream of political discourse. So the only reason that I'm standing first and foremost in this election is to crowbar our political objectives into the European debate. I have said up front that if I win or lose the European seats, I will be standing in the next general election in Meath West. So other political parties do the same, but they don't normally say it up front. I'm saying it up front. So nobody's voting for me on any misunderstanding in those terms. But
that's interesting.
Yeah, and we want to see as well. We hope that it will have a positive influence on we're running about 60 local election candidates so far. That will increase, and we hope it'll have a cumulative effect on that as well.
That's great. And that's the final question from me, and then I'm finished all my questions. And so how do you think, obviously it's always a tough question. I noticed in one of those opinion polls that more or less said that you were on, I seen the 5% poll 2 weeks ago. I think it was 4% last weekend. I noticed I think it was the Sunday Independent or whatever. And Ireland Thinks, I can't remember, but they were saying you were probably about equivalent to 3 seats. Did I see that in the Dáil? I noticed.
Yeah, so it's funny, there's a seat bonus in the southern system. So once you get kind of over 5 or 6%, you start to get more seats per vote.
Yeah.
There's a kind of, let's say, a little bit of a seat famine just under that figure. So it does even make it more difficult to see where we're at. If we come in at 4 or 5% in the next general election, I'll be deliriously happy. And if we came in at that seat level, I'd also be happy as well. One thing I've learned again from my old colleagues is that this is a long-term project. One of the real curses of modern politics, especially in the South, but in other Western European democracy, is the short-termism of politics. So politics is becoming increasingly career-driven rather than what I would say ideologically or project-driven. And that means that most political activists are just in it for a short period of time. What we're trying to do here is to really put down the roots, the grassroots organization that will build and grow for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And if we can get ourselves into those type of figures that you mentioned, you could have a Fianna Fáil Sinn Fein government in the future. We'd see it as our responsibility to keep them on their toes.
Hey, Peadar, from the bottom of my heart, thank you very, very much for taking the time out. Ridiculously busy day with the I was going to say election, but that's the wrong word. Selection, whatever phrase we want to
Coronation,
use.
installation
For the new Taoiseach. And I noticed you're traveling all over the country, north and south. I think last night you were in Cantor. Where were you? You were in County Cork. Somewhere was it Cantor?
I was Cantor. I got back to Navan at 1 a.m. last night. On Thursday night, I'm in Artane in Dublin. And on Friday night, I'm in Cavan Town. And on Monday night, I'm in Newbridge, County Kildare. So pretty much three public meetings every week at the moment.
Peadar, I have sneaky little follow of you on Twitter or whatever, and you're zigzagging all across the 32 counties everywhere. So you've got some engine on you, so fair play to you. But genuinely, for me, before I let Kevin close out, Kevin Maher, thank you very much for being our guest on the podcast. Over to you, Kevin.
All I can say is, again, thanks for your time. Thanks for being very open and very honest with us, and I think that's been a fascinating discussion. I hope everybody watching it gets something out of it.
Brilliant. And I would just encourage everybody to no matter what their political persuasion is, I would say just keep getting involved in this political project, because the idea of Irish unity, being in touching distance in our generation, is a great honour for this generation. given that so many generations past never got the opportunity to be next to or near it. So we should keep all pushing together.
Thanks a million. Thanks a million, Peadar.
No worries. Ihawa, slán go fóill.
Ihawa, slán.